Ladies and gentlemen, if you could get back to your seats, we will start the final panel for today. Our final panel for today will discuss if economic liberalism is a curse or a cure. This panel will be moderated by Tricia Yeoh, COO of Ideas, and the panelists are Dato Charon Wardini Mokhzani, Executive Director of Khazanah Research Institute, Azlan Awang from Idris Institute at MTEM, Dr. Linda Quayle from University of Nottingham, Malaysia campus, and Dr. Sufyan Jusso, Fellow at the World Trade Institute. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Fariza, our MC. And welcome back to the final panel session of the day. I hope that you've enjoyed the conference so far, and thank you for spending your Saturday with us. So we have a panel of really distinguished guests, and I think it's the same for all the speakers that we've had throughout the day. But please allow me to introduce my panelists from the right to the left. So on my right, I have Mr. Azlan Awang from the Idris Institute, or MTEM. He's also quite involved in a whole number of different NGOs, including the Bantah TPPA, which is against the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and a Blind Spot, which is a civil society movement on speaking out for the voice of the voiceless. So basically, he's coming from more of the left approach. Is that correct? If I may? Okay, and then on my right here is none other than Dato Charon Wardini, who's the Managing Director of Khazanah Research Institute, also as an Executive Director at the Managing Director's Office in Khazanah. Quite a distinguished past. He was basically the number 2 man in the CIMB group, so a former banker in his past life. I'm actually not sure where he stands ideologically. A few people were asking me before this, but if I understand correctly, it's somewhere in the center, slightly to the left, if I'm not mistaken. But you can clarify that for us later. And then on my left, we have Dr. Sufyan Jusso, who's a Senior Fellow at the World Trade Institute. He's also from National University of Malaysia, correct? And he's actually done a lot of writing and speaking in public, promoting free trade. So I think it's quite interesting that he's sitting on my left and they're sitting on my right. So, and finally, we have Dr. Linda Quayle, who is the Assistant Professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Nottingham, Malaysia campus. She actually specializes in Southeast Asian regional politics, especially ASEAN-related issues. So I think what she will be able to do is bring a sort of a regional perspective outside of just our myopic Malaysia. So just to set a bit of context, our last panel for today is on economic liberalism. We've talked a lot since the morning on political liberalism, the higher level philosophical perspective of what liberalism means. But I think when it comes down to it, most people would actually argue on economics. If you ask, at least I think many people in this hall, most of us would agree that on some level of social liberal values, we could agree to a certain extent on democracy and individual rights. But when it comes to economics, it's very contentious. So for instance, what we are facing right now is sort of decline in the regional economy. We looked at what's happening in China that's affecting our own local market. The Malaysian economy, no less, is also going through some turbulent times. We've implemented GST recently. There's also a gross deficit in sort of public trust in our national institutions. There's also a deficit in public trust in certain state-owned enterprises, and we all don't have to say which one that one is. And all these are contributing to, I think, some uncertainties of our times. People also speculate that this decline might last for some time more. So I think with this context in place, there's this discussion happening here. What is the solution? And when we talk about liberalism, opening up of markets, allowing foreign investors to come in, foreign players to enter our local market, is that really the solution? Is that going to cure our economic woes, or is it going to make it worse? So, of course, coming from ideas, we have a perspective, but I'm going to put that on hold at the moment because I'm chairing and I have to give equal time to everyone here. What we're going to do is I'll start off with my panelists on the right. So Azlan, each of you will be given 7 to 9 minutes. We'll have the bell ring at the 7-minute mark, and then after which you have another 2 minutes or so to go. So if you can keep it short and snappy, there's 4 of us. We'll also have some interaction. So Azlan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tricia. Okay, it's a very difficult subject to me because I'm an engineer by training. So I couldn't go to the level of the people in the last panel. It's very philosophical, and I think the way I want to go about it is to try to analyze market liberalism on a very empirical manner, right? I think we have few things in the Malaysian context now. One is the looming TPPA agreement, right? It's coming. It's in a very advanced stage of negotiations. The Americans have got the fast-track approval from Congress, so they can at any time sign. We are not obligated to refer to the Parliament. Actually, the executives can sign anytime, and once the issues are clear, they will sign. And the other thing is what is already being implemented. What I see as a departure from previous economic policies, and namely this is the new economic model, the economic transformation program, as well as the RMK 10, which has passed. Now it's been replaced by RMK 11. Now I see that NEM, the new economic model, the ETP, as a departure from our previous more distributive, more people-centric set of policies or economic doctrine. So I'm making it quite simplistic. I'm trying to say that in a simple manner that the shift towards more what has been termed as a more neoliberal shift in what I see in the content of the new economic model, the ETP, as well as the RMK 11, for having missed a lot of issues which was contained in RMK 9 or previous RMKs, the Rancangan Malaysia or the Malaysia Plan, the 5-year Malaysia Plan. For instance, RMK 9 is the Malaysian Plan between 2005 to 2010, 2006 to 2010, has a very specific goal on equality. Specifically, they have a very clear target on trying to achieve the Gini coefficient of 0.35. That was 2005, right? RMK 10, which followed the new economic model. New economic model was launched in March 2010. RMK 10 in the middle of the year, right, and followed by ETP somewhere September 2010. So you can see the effect of everything else had the NEM as a basis. And you see that there's all these very specific goals are omitted, no more. In place of them are many concepts like inclusiveness and sustainability and whatnot, which is to me a very vague issues. So the way I want to go about it is to see how NEM and ETP have fared over the last 5 years. It's already in the 6th year now, the new economic model, right? This is how I choose to want to analyze the by having said in the earlier part of my speech that I'm equating the shift towards new market liberalism with the event with the adoption of the new economic model of 2010, the ETP and so on. So can I have the slides so that you can understand me clearly, because I'm going to have to work with some kind of numbers. Can I have the slide, please? It's already up there. Okay. So the main emphasis in the new economic model is basically to pursue the private investment. There's little emphasis on the net export, right? Not much, right? It's basically private investment. And the idea is to get as much domestic private investment as possible with little government investment. But what we see is that, and they're supposed to raise about 1.4 trillion in terms of private investment to drive the NEA entry point projects. We're supposed to deliver about 400 billion ringgit in that 10 years. So it's 400 billion driven by 1.4 trillion private investment. I think our first concern is this. I think this has been raised very many times on public platforms, like what's done with the issues raised by REPSA, for instance, on the issue of investment. We are not clear what level of private investment has taken place. There has not been any breakdown on how much private investment. This is already the 6th year, right? The Pemandu have not given. So, if to me the success or failure of Pemandu or ETP is the ability to raise private investment. What we have seen is a drive for mega projects. We see MRT and what's coming. The River of Life is already on the way. It's halfway already, and what's coming is the high-speed rail. This is what's been driving MRT, as we said, and these are mostly government investment. It's public investment, but done through GLCs like the MRT Corp and so on. So in that respect, it's quite a big fuss to me, that here you are pursuing that. Okay, I've got to go quickly. We have, as Blind Spot and MTEM, we have made quite several criticism on the Pemandu's performance based on the annual report 2014, right? Regards the achieving of the how much GDP they have achieved compared to the non-NKEA sectors. But what we've seen is that what we fear is that the growth of the Malaysian economy may have been based on more of the construction elements. What we could see between comparison between 5 years before NEM ETP and 5 years after NEM ETP, construction has got the highest growth level, about 11%, followed by manufacturing, very marked growth from previous 5 years. But we suspect that even in the manufacturing sector, it's not so much the actual goods and the traditional goods, but it's more of the construction materials. So it's a lot of construction-driven growth, in our opinion. I think what's most important to us is that one of the main pitch of the ETP is to achieve the high income status by 2020, and that is by surpassing the World Bank threshold of about 15,000 US per capita. Now, that was their estimate in 2009, right? At the rate things are going, it might be much lower than 15,000 US. It might be in the region of about 13 or 14 something. But even so, focus on the GDP and GNI per capita seems to have lost focus on the needs of the larger community, the people, the workers, the households. We once posed a question to Pemandu, specifically to Dato Idris himself. We had the privilege of having a special meeting with him. We asked Dato Idris, why is your wage to GDP for the NKEA sectors only 21%? Now, in 2005, because at that point, the most recent data available on wage to GDP or CEGDP was the 2005. We have already reached about 28%. Whereas the NKEA, which is supposed to go for more high-end, high-value, high-wage sectors, they could only achieve 21%. And these are from their own numbers in their roadmap for Malaysia document. Now, the second thing is the creation of jobs. I mean, there are many issues here actually, but I'm not I don't think we'll have the time to go through all this. The other thing is the creation of the claim that they have achieved 1.8 million jobs between 2011 and 2014. This was stated in their annual report 2014, right? 1.5 out of the 1.8 are from the NKA sectors. But when we check the EPF registration, right, these are available to public in their annual reports. When we check those documents, we only notice there are only about 600,000 plus between 2011 and 2014. So what kind of jobs was actually created by ETP? Big difference, 1.8 claimed, but only 600,000 jobs. Now, we wrote this, came out in the various media. They replied, they said, they answered that, no, these are not necessarily new workers, fresh from school. These are old workers. They are from other jobs. So they got these NKA jobs, right? So they already have EPF. But when they left their old job, somebody must replace that job, isn't it? Right? So until today, these are questions which have not been answered. Again, the labor market data itself, right, is a very problematic set of data. We are supposed to have about 14 million, or in 2012, 12.7 million employed, right? About the same time, if you recall, Richard Riot claimed that there are 6.7 million foreigners in the country, right? We do not know whether 6.7 million, all the foreigners are workers or including families. So if you take into account the 6.7, so what's left?
Wrap up.
Yeah, okay. What's left for the? Okay, these are core issues. We're not trying to cherry pick ETP's problem, but I think there's got to be a revisit. There must be a revisit on our economic approach, our economic doctrine, right? And for that, we must achieve consensus. There must be a lot more discourse on what should be our social goals. There must be a balance between growth and distribution. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Encik Azlan Awang. It seemed like he was critical of Pemandu for his 7 minutes, so whoever is from Pemandu here might be able to respond to him. But I think it's interesting that he's actually, although he, I suppose coming from the left perspective of economic approach, he is also critical of GLCs, which is also something that people on the right would criticize because we don't agree with government intervening in the economy. I could respond to him, but as Dr. Mazli said earlier, moderators are not the panelists. So I'm going to pass the time now to Dr. Linda Quayle, who also has some slides, I believe, for us.
So, is economic liberalism a curse or a cure? Well, intrinsically, it's neither, of course. It all depends on the way it's implemented. It all depends on policy. As we're dealing in C's here, I'm going to argue that the only kind of economic liberalism that can truly be defined as a cure is the compassionate, creative, critical, and consultative kind, not the complacent, condescending, and cruel kind. Economic liberalism, as we know, can undoubtedly point to huge successes. A large swathe of the world's people have been able to lift themselves from poverty through the economic growth brought about by liberal economic policies. And Southeast Asia, of course, has been witness to many of those successes. But not all growth is good growth. And of most salience at the moment is the growing concern about the correlation of high rates of growth with persistent and troubling inequality. Definitely flavour of the year. Realising this, for quite a number of years now, the World Bank and the IMF have themselves been promoting economic liberalism not as an automatic cure or panacea, but rather as a kind of toolkit. My former students who are here are thinking, oh, here she goes, technological wizard again. So on rising inequality, for example, we find the following, which I'll let you read for yourselves. As you can see, we've moved a very long way from the market knows best and the one-size-fits-all mantra. In this conception, states are not only facilitating and enabling, but mitigating, aggregating, and mediating, much more hands-on roles, demanding considerable policy acuity. ASEAN, in fairness, has long been very clear about this in articulating its community aspirations. The ASEAN Economic Community aims for many eminently liberal goals, as the AEC's opponents always stress. But it also targets corrective measures. The ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community specifically recognises the need to ensure that all ASEAN peoples are provided with social welfare and protection from the possible negative impacts of globalisation and integration. As with all ASEAN processes, of course, there's a long way to go from vision to implementation. But this juxtaposition demonstrates a very clear realisation that economic liberalisation has its downsides and there is a need for balance. This balance is not easy to achieve, and I'm going to very briefly outline, well, I hope 5, but if not 5, then 4 difficulties. Each represents a challenge for the optimal economic liberalism that I and many others, I think, would like to see. Firstly, in implementing any economic liberalisation project, there's often a trade-off between the corporate and the individual interest. And this trade-off has to be somehow managed by smarter, more compassionate policy than we often seem able to come up with. I sometimes discuss with my student the episode from The West Wing, where a pro-free trade administration is trying to sell a new free trade agreement with the simple mantra that free trade creates better, higher-paying jobs. Then the characters come face to face with people who are about to lose their jobs with this result. Many thoughtful ASEAN commentators at the moment are warning that economic integration is expected to generate large returns, let's be clear on that, but they will be unevenly distributed, and governments need to look ahead and act to make sure the losers will be compensated. But this is tricky. As our West Wing characters discovered, it's not always easy to square every circle. Secondly, in the case of Southeast Asia, things are made harder by the considerable gaps within states, despite the benefits of economic growth. These are Gini coefficients. You find very different representations of these, by the way, but generally they're quite high, despite some reductions in recent years. This translates into a lot of inequality on the ground. I've just got one example here. This is from Indonesia, but there are many, many that could be cited. And this inequality is of great concern to many people at the moment, as we know. According to a survey from Pew Global Attitudes last year, very widely quoted, large numbers of people consider the gap between the rich and poor in their country to be a big or very big problem. Inequality, or even the perception of inequality, is problematic, not only ethically but economically and politically. As we saw, the IMF is very aware of this. Thirdly, there are yawning gaps between the states in Southeast Asia, which makes policies more difficult to implement. This is the Human Development Index ranking, showing a really large spread between the top and the bottom. These are much more challenging figures than they have in Europe. Just to give you some comparisons, we look within the EU, comparison Luxembourg, richest, Bulgaria, poorest according to GDP per capita. You've got that kind of gap. If you go wider within Europe and go outside the EU, you have bigger gaps, of course, but nothing like the one that we're struggling with here in Southeast Asia. Fourth, it's pretty hard, as you can imagine, to form a community on this basis. Fourthly, in our list of challenges to economic liberalism, we have a historical conundrum to ponder. This is from a Brookings Institute researcher. Today's rich, developed countries had initiated safety nets while they were still poorer than today's developing countries. You see the figures along the top there and the comparisons down the bottom. Now we can discuss later, if you want to, why this might be the case. But at the very least, these figures prompt us, I would say, to interrogate the colonial, Cold War and post-Cold War backgrounds to this set of circumstances and to ask what answers economic liberalism can offer here. Fifthly and lastly, I want to throw in I've still got 2 minutes, right? Is that 2 minutes? Okay. Fifthly and lastly, I'd like to throw in a troubling little article by Peter Quayle from the Australian National University earlier this year. He talks about the lack of capacity of Southeast Asian states as measured by two factors: levels of taxation and expenditure. As he notes, statistics on both are pretty opaque, but he came up with the following. There are various things to say about these figures, and again, we can talk about them later if you would like to. But Macaulay suggests there are certain implications. As we've seen, citizens do need some degree of protection from the colder winds of the market. Accordingly, a huge amount of inequality literature hones in, quite rightly, on education, social protection, smarter revenue raising, and so on, all really good things. But we need to appreciate what a stretch this all is for some regional governments. And we need to be aware of the problems that arise when there are excessive expectations about the role that the state can play. So, in light of all these problems, do we jettison the economic liberal project that's brought considerable success? Do we turn, as some want to protectionism and nationalism? Well, no, I would say. And it doesn't look like the region's publics would want to either. Probably don't have time to look at these in detail, but again, from that same Pew Global Attitudes survey, there seems to be still considerable momentum behind some of the ideas that animate the economic liberalism project. People still support free trade, free market, they still support relatively lower taxes. So how can we deliver then? Economic liberalism has built itself quite a little bandwagon, but it still has considerable ideational capital behind it. But if the number of people who see themselves as losers grows, then that momentum will crumble. Those who employ liberal economic policies need to be proactive in foreseeing and mitigating downsides. And as we've seen, this isn't an easy task. It demands a regional and extra-regional effort, not merely a collection of national ones. I will end where I began, with a plea for a compassionate, creative, critical and consultative economic liberalism, which alone can present itself truly as a cure. Only by enlarging the pool of stakeholders can we generate new ideas and options so that the cases where circles cannot be squared can be as few as possible.
Thank you very much, Dr. Linda Quayle. It's quite interesting that she used the term compassionate because it's not often a term used when we discuss economics. It's something that we can unpack further, whether either model, whether it's a more socialist model or a liberal model, can incorporate something like compassion. So we've had two speakers, someone who's been highly critical of the neoliberal approach that he thinks that our current government is taking. We also have Dr. Linda, the second speaker, who I suppose gives a more qualified approach to it, that economic liberalism has worked to a certain extent, to a certain degree, but also questions whether I think countries in the region, I think you used the term capacity, whether these countries have the capacity to be able to cope with the liberal approaches that we are seeing them take. All right, the third speaker I'm going to ask Dr. Sufyan Jusso, who I think will take a rather different approach from the first two, and he also has some slides, so I'll pass the time.
Thank you very much, Tricia. First, I have to make my opening statement. I don't like the title. It's very difficult for me to find any reason why economic liberalism is a curse, and neither it could lead to a cure that people would like to see. To a certain extent, I find some common ground with what Azlan said earlier. But my problem is this. I spent many years working in this World Trade Institute as a researcher, looking at things from the European and Malaysia in 2030 in 2015. So we are like looking at coming back. But my work in ASEAN and some remote places in the world, in Micronesia, if you look at the map, it's just in the middle of the Pacific. I have to go back 30 years from 2015. So I come from a very confused mind. When I come back to Kuala Lumpur, I thought like, okay, I'm back in 2015 in Kuala Lumpur when I was like in the 70s. Last week, next week, Tuesday, I'll be in 70s again. But in November, I'll be in 2030. So this is the problem that I have. So the problem here is, wherever I go, there's always a question of economic nationalism and economic openness. And this question of degree. What is the degree of nationalism you have, and what is the degree of openness that you have in order to generate higher participation in the economy? If you go to Switzerland, we spent like many years in Switzerland, things are expensive. And you ask the Swiss, my wife, she's here, she asked the Swiss, why is that things are expensive here? The Swiss said, because it's Swiss. And they are so proud of their Swiss products. And it's expensive because of the quality. And this is what we want to see at home. The homegrown, innovative, expensive, high-income products made in Malaysia, where people can be proud to say, why is that expensive? Because it's made in Malaysia. But now, if we want to buy Malaysian products, we want to say, why is it so expensive? This is made in Malaysia. Right. We are so malu. I have to use the term malu because I cannot find the right English word for malu. Ashamed of buying Malaysian products. So this is the problem, you know. On one hand, you have a group of people looking for economic nationalism, but in order to have a higher degree of economic nationalism, my perspective is we must have a higher degree of openness to allow people to produce very high quality goods, very high quality services in order to become world-class citizen. This is what we are looking for. We are not just looking for a high-income country who just high income from the GDP perspective, but people are low income in nature. The World Bank says if you are like go beyond 12,000 US dollars per capita, you are a high income country. If you go to certain high income country in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, not Singapore, another high income country, you don't even get the internet, okay. So that is high income country, but we don't want to be a high income country with no Wi-Fi. We are dead. Okay, let me go through my slides. That's my opening statement. I want to go a bit into the history, theoretical. I understand that we have problems with how do we approach in the economy. My friend Azlan and our colleagues in MTEM have been talking about TPPA and other things, but this is not the end, and it's not the beginning. We began our approach towards liberalization, not liberalism, but liberalization in the economy the moment we started the empire in Malacca, like a few hundred years ago. We opened up the country, Malacca. I come from Terengganu, so I always claim that Terengganu civilization is much earlier than Malacca. Okay, never mind. We in Terengganu started to open the Terengganu economy. People came from China, from Yunnan and everywhere. Then Malacca followed through, copied what Terengganu did. So then we have the Malacca Empire. It started with with a very liberal approach, because the government knew that if you don't liberalize your economy, people don't just turn up. So when Malaysia obtained the independence, Malaya then, the first thing the government did was to join the GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, and then we joined ASEAN as political organization, which then turned into an economic organization. Soon, by the end of this year, hopefully, a lot of skeptics will say, yes, it's going to be just on paper, but at least we are going to have the ASEAN Economic Community. And we joined the WTO as a result of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. And then because of the nature of the multilateral negotiations, you can't have 160 people agree on everything in one room. Then you have free trade agreements. So this is the nature of our liberalization, the path towards economic liberalization. But the question mark here is, where do we stop if we want to stop? Or what are the components that include social justice? Because you cannot have total liberalization without social justice. A lot of people are not rich, but a lot of people want to participate in the economy to upgrade themselves. If we ask people, the gelandangan, the people on the street, they don't want to be gelandangan, the people on the street. They want to upgrade themselves. So these are the social justice issues that we need to bring. Although we are, like, I'm known as a market liberal, but I still think that even if as a market liberal, there still need to be some form of equality or some kind of rooms for improvement. So for me, I look at innovation as one of the examples to encourage improvement in the economy. However, these are the three major issues that are being discussed. Every time we discuss about liberalism or liberalization from the Malaysian perspective, these are the three major items that will always be on the table. Whether you like it or not, you have to discuss with this. We have to look at the government procurement, we have to look at the state-owned enterprises, or in our case we call it GLCs, government-linked companies, and then there's always the issue of Bumiputra policy. Okay? So the question that Azlan mentioned earlier about the ETP has actually brought a lot more programs linked with construction, or the construction is running the economy at the moment. That is basically government procurement. So how do we improve on this? How do we reduce the dependency on government procurement? I'm not saying these are bad. I'm throwing questions here. How do we reduce this? And then maybe by liberalizing it a bit, because if you are stuck at home, you want to go abroad, but government procurement is not part of ASEAN arrangement. You need to have a special arrangement between ASEAN member states. And then the SOE, how do we relook at the models? The SOE model to encourage competition, risk-taking culture, and innovation. There are a lot of rumors and anecdotes being said that SOE, despite the good intention, has become a barrier of entry to small and medium enterprises. So this is another question. And then the next question has always been, I think it was discussed earlier in the earlier panel, whether we want to move beyond Bumiputra policy but social-based equality or improvement in the society. So for me, the way forward is actually to encourage innovation, where we can get high income, high value, high quality products which we can be proud of as made in Malaysia, and then with progressive liberalization. This is the way I see it on how to improve the economy, although we want to be economically nationalistic. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Sufyan. So I guess we should consider it a success if Azlan leaves this conference realizing that he agrees with Dr. Sufyan and is on the same side as him, right? Okay. Final speaker is Dato Charon. He doesn't have any slides, so he'll just comment, I think.
Thank you, Tricia, and thank you. Saiful and Ideas for inviting me. Actually, when we first had this conversation, I said that I'm a mercantilist. I believe that the Corn Laws should never have been repealed in the UK, and that's probably the biggest mistake the United Kingdom ever made. Sorry, how many of you here have studied or are studying economics? Okay. How many of you here know what economic liberalism is? Gosh, that's more than me. Okay, it's a great subject, economic liberalism, because it can mean anything you want it to mean, a bit like liberalism as well. I caught the very tail end of the last session where liberalism was equated with rationalism. Now, okay, well, who doesn't want to be rational, right? So in that case, it covers, it kind of covers everything. But you know what most economics would call economic liberalism is something the liberal wing of the Democratic Party would not support. This is something which the neocons in the US would support. So we have to get a bit clear on the things. But let me start with a couple of examples. Usually we talk about liberalization in terms of trade. And the idea is that we should open up our markets, and because that will increase exports. And increasing exports is seen as a good thing. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. For example, Panellist grows the best mangoes in the world. They're called harumanis, but you never heard of it. You can't buy them because the entire, all harumanis mangoes are exported to Japan at a very high price. So yes, we have increased exports, but no one in Malaysia can afford to eat Panellist mangoes. So is that necessarily a good thing? We import most of our rice. We import almost all our beef. So having imports is not a bad thing either. So what is the point of international trade? What's the point of exports and imports? I would say it's not just to increase GDP, because again, that's not the point. You can't eat GDP. If you read the book which Khazanah Research Institute came up on the state of the household, to me that represents what we think all of this is about, which is increasing household income. In particular, increasing the median household income. The median means the middle household. So if you have 10,000 households, it's what household number 5,000 gets, which is different than the average household income. Average household incomes means you add up all the incomes and you divide by the number of households. The problem is, I could raise the average house income of this room by inviting one billionaire in, but it won't change the median income of this room, right? So if we want to look at one number, let's look at what raises the median income. So, you know, exports and imports are good, but it's not immediately obvious to anybody why more exports or more imports leads to higher household income. So we have to think about, when we talk about liberalization, especially, it's always normally used in the context of trade, in terms of increasing exports or whatever. So we have to be very clear that increasing exports is not an end in itself, nor is reducing imports. Those are just means to an end. The only end to me that matters is, have we raised median household income? And I think any debate about this should be about what is the best way of median household income. I don't care whether we use market mechanisms or government mechanisms or any other mechanisms. Unlike ideas, I am not wedded to the idea that the free market is the solution to all our problems. I think there are many ways to solve the problem. Sometimes markets work, sometimes markets don't. Sometimes governments work, sometimes governments don't. So we have to look at how we're going to increase household income. Now, if you look at what Malaysia did in becoming an export-driven country, we started off being very reliant on agriculture, and then in the 80s we became more and more of a manufacturing country to manufacture more. And that was the beginning of our export liberalization. We signed lots of trade agreements and all that. And the idea was that that would, and that succeeded in raising household income. And, so we can see the trend. And what we did was really, we looked at Korea and we looked at Japan, because these were the models for us. This is how these countries grew. Now, if you think about it, we've talked about middle-income countries and higher-income countries. And there's something called the middle-income trap. And the idea is that when a country gets to a certain level, a middle-income level, around $10,000 US per capita, which is Malaysia, in terms of dollar GDP per capita, we're around the same as Mexico and Turkey. So once you get to that level, to break out at a level, to become a high-income country like Korea and Taiwan is hard. So the idea is we follow what Korea and Taiwan are doing, we can get there. But the funny thing is, outside Korea and Taiwan, you can't really find an example of any country that's broken out of the middle income trap. You can look at, or Japan. I don't think Japan's a great example because Japan was actually a very rich country at the beginning of the 20th century. They were so big and rich, they beat Russia in a war, right? And then they got poor after the war because America bombed the whole country, so they started poor. But once upon a time, they were rich. And again, look at a country like Brazil and Argentina. We can't learn much from them because they were very, very rich once upon a time. Argentina was the 7th richest country in the world. And it just got poorer and poorer and poorer. So it started off high income and kind of like slid down into middle income. So we can't learn any lessons from Argentina. But let's look at Korea and Taiwan. They are the antithesis of liberal economies. Government is in everything. Government tells people what to do. And the big example from Korea has always been POSCO, which was, the governor of Korea decided to start from scratch a steel industry. And that brought Korea into the manufacturing age and brought it into the way it is today. Now, it's too late for us to do that now. Steel was the right industry to be in maybe in the 60s and the 70s. It probably isn't the right industry to be in today. But, there is a case to be made that maybe it is something for the government to do, the government to press and push one particular industry forward, because if you leave it up to businessmen, they'll never make that big investment, because it takes a big investment to do something like steel, and Korea did it. So you could say that, forget whether you like markets, don't like markets, look at what Korea did. Let's see what Korea did. There's a professor called Ha-Joon Chang, whom you should all read. He writes a book, The Pelican Guide to Economics. So it's written for the layman. And so it's bestseller. It's a bestseller in the UK. And it's bestseller everywhere, actually. And he's from Korea, and he teaches at Cambridge University. And he's big on this idea that we should use, government has an important role to play in developing in a country. He's got one great quip, because if you ask a free marketeer, you should always go for what your competitive advantage is. So his answer is that, well, if you live in a tropical country where it rains and you have fertile soil, your competitive advantage is planting bananas. So all tropical countries, what you should do is just plant bananas, because that's your competitive advantage, and leave the watchmaking to the Swiss, because that's their competitive advantage. Great, but I mean, you end up with a banana economy, and which is actually, banana republics really. That's how banana republic started, by the way. The U.S. Actually planted bananas in these countries, and the banana plantation companies were so strong they controlled these countries, which is why they were called banana republics. So that's how the phrase banana republic started. But that's an aside. So getting back to this idea that of course you can use government, and I'm a firm believer that there's also sometimes markets work, sometimes governments work. But to say that it's liberalism or non-liberalism, wrong question to me. The right question to me is, how do we raise median incomes, and what is the best way to do it? Maybe government, maybe markets, it may be a combination of all of the above. And the other thing is, don't be fooled and be taken in by this phrase, level playing field. Tun Mahathir said something. I don't agree with everything Tun Mahathir said. I don't think anybody agrees with everything that Tun Mahathir said. But he did say one clever thing about this, is that, level playing field is fine, but it's a bit like having the Notre Dame US football team play against the University of Nottingham American football team, composed of only the economic students of the University of Nottingham. I say, it's a level playing field, fine, great. You have Notre Dame flattening us. And this phrase was used once at a conference I was at, which was organized by OECD. And they were trying to promote this idea of level playing field. And again, I got very angry, and I said this comment. I said, if you want to talk about sports, let's talk about golf. In golf, you have handicaps. So, if you want to use a golf analogy, why use an American football analogy? Use a golf analogy, use handicaps. So really beware of the kind of phrases which these evil people, these evil economic liberals use. Because what they do is that they kind of pervert your mind. They make you think in terms of, markets are good and, level playing field is wrong. To me, the only thing we should be concerned of is how do we raise median incomes. And the way to do that is to create good jobs And the only way to create good jobs is to have innovation and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't mean letting the markets run riot.
Okay, well, thank you, Dato Charon. I can see Wan Saiful just bursting to respond to all the remarks here on stage. So we'll give him some time later, maybe. But I think, all the panelists seem to be playing it really safe in the sense that, they all say, I accept some form of market economy, but it has to be a managed market economy. There has to be some kind of measures for the poor, and even Dr. Sufyan alluded to that. So maybe I can ask just one question round first. Yes, thank you for all your philosophical principles, but the question is, if I were to ask you about Malaysia, and if you could just answer, should we liberalize the market further from what we have right now? So for instance, should we, number one, open up government procurement? Should we liberalize the Bumiputra agenda? Should we further liberalize service sector, like the legal sector? What should we do now? Should we further liberalize in order to increase household incomes, as you say? Or should we stop at where we're at? And then after that, we can open to the floor. So I think there's a mic over there and also over there. So if anyone wants to take this challenge.
Dr. Sufyan's slide actually had the same question, right, on that. I'm not going to answer. I'm going to answer by not answering, which is to say that what is the causal connection? Find the causal connections between this and raising household incomes. I mean, why choose these three issues? There are any thousands of issues you could choose with our economy. Why these three in particular?
Okay, so, but you can choose any angle, I suppose. I mean, the question is, should we be liberalizing further, or should we stop where we're at?
Well, I think okay. How do we create good jobs for everyone? For example, 600,000 people will enter primary school this year. In 15 years' time, some of them will be around Form 5, into the workforce, and maybe a bit more after that. So how do we create jobs for those 600,000 kids this year? I'm not sure government procurement or anything else is the way to solve that. What we need, somehow, we have to create high-value industries in this country which produce high-value jobs, right? Sure. But the thing is, that's a really glib thing for me to say. It's very difficult to know how to do it, but I'm not convinced that attacking SOE's Bumi policy or GP is necessarily the first thing to do in trying to envision what we're going to do, what kind of jobs are the 600,000 kids entering primary school this year, in January 2016, what kind of jobs will they have?
Okay, well, I mean, I suppose theoretically speaking, the reason people support the market economy is because precisely when you open it up, then you allow for these small and medium companies to be able to compete, right? So not just allowing companies that happen to have those relationships within government in this kind of cronyism approach. But, let's ask.
Korea was the ultimate crony economy. Yeah. And look at that, look at Korea.
Any Koreans here?
That's the ultimate Korea economy. I mean, the president decided, I'll support 5 chaebols. And he supported them, he backed them all the way. And the whole economy was subsidizing those 5 chaebols. Now, it may be an impure way of doing it, but outside Korea, you can't point to any other country which has broken out of the middle income trap. So, whatever works. To me, it doesn't.
Okay, I think Dr. Sufyan, before we started, wanted to, he was competing to go last because he said that I have something to say about GLCs, and Dato Charon's from a GLC. So maybe you want to say something about that as well as to respond to my question?
Thank you. I'm not going to go on the specific. But I think we have to go on the systemic issue here. GP, GLC, state-owned enterprise, Bumi, these are just part of the argument. But the systemic issue is, how do we drive local investment? If you look at the focus of our investment policy, E&E, for example, electronic and electrics, electric and electronics, E&E. Who are the players in the E&E? They're not us. They're not Malaysians. They may be led by Malaysians, but they are not not owned by Malaysians. But this is part of the global value chain. So how do we then insert our interest in the E&E. So we have to develop the SMEs. There are so many SMEs who may be interested in this. That's one of the examples. So how do we then create a high value, high quality, high technology? Many of us are involved in this field. Then we can be part of this. Then we can increase our income level. we have to be reliant on the MNCs. But to be totally reliant on FDI is not a good thing. You have to have local driven investment and innovation, which then will support the global value chain. If you bring in FDI, which is purely FDI, and in E&E we may have high level job and low level job. You can have an operator. Now a lot of electronic factories brought in workers from Indonesia or somewhere else, Bangladesh. This doesn't contribute to the upgrading of our economy. So we need to look at how do we upgrade the economy, then they contribute to the income level of Malaysia and Malaysians. That is important. So you need to have a policy that encourage local innovation that contribute to the high income level, local investors who are willing to take the risk. So we must have a policy to support the risk takers. All right? The risk takers should be given more room for them to contribute to the economy. A lot of people are now playing safe. That's why I put the GP there. This is the safest economy. You go to the government, masuk tender, get your money, and that's it. There's no innovation. But if you go outside the economy, outside the GP, I'm not saying that GP is bad, it's good. It creates business, it creates the economy, but it doesn't create innovation. You don't encourage innovation by just purely concentrating on GP. So that's the reason why I put it there. I'm not against GP or people who are concentrating on GP. That's part and parcel of their business. That so be it. But what I'm saying is, if we don't encourage this is a problem. But what we have here at home now in Malaysia, a lot of people find it, they're like choking. Now I'm coming from myself. I'm not being cautious now. People are choking because they want to innovate, they want to do R&D, there's no more money. Yesterday someone came to my office, they wanted to do simple stuff like travel search to the like of Expedia or Booking.com. This guy has been in the travel business for a very long time. So he said, "Doctor, I need money." I said, "Okay, fine, let's make few phone calls." So we made few phone calls to the government agencies that we know. None can support this. MDEC is no longer supporting this kind of business. So where do we find this? People who want to be innovative, yet they don't have the funding. Yeah? So this is one question. So how do we support people, innovative industry that can go up and create more income? So this, when people get choked, they get tired, then they get angry, then they go out. That's why we have, there are a lot of arguments why people don't come back and why we have brain drain, but still one of the arguments why people don't come back because the perception that you're not getting support here. But people go out because to contribute to the brain drain because they feel that they're not getting support here. So this is the same thing. So that's one issue. Another issue is when you want to do something, you want to be innovative, you're not encouraged to be innovative. In the universities, you do not need to be innovative. You don't be innovative in the university. Because if you want to work hard, you want to be beyond others, people will start telling you, don't work too hard. They will ridicule you. You get become an average professor, that's fine. Just go and teach. No need to write journals for Q1, Q2. That's not for us. That's why I'm happy to have average universities in Malaysia. Ranking like what? 700? Yeah. Let's live with the mediocrity that we have. Then we are happy. This is something that we need to do. We need to think of something, how to improve ourselves. Forget about the big words of liberalism, liberalization. These are like textbook stuff. But what we want is a thinking society. I to a certain extent, I agree with the earlier presentation about, I'm sorry, I'm taking a bit of your time, about NKEA. NKEA has been encouraged by the Pemandu. But when people go to NKEA, it becomes so bureaucratic. It doesn't encourage privateers, smallholders, to go through the system. We know someone who is very much involved in pharmaceutical. And this guy, he's been encouraged by the Pemandu people to say, like, look, do your presentation. So he did his presentation. He left one of the GLC running pharmaceutical for like almost 5-6 years now, having this 6-year dream about having his own pharmaceutical factory. So he made presentation to Pemandu. What happened today? Nothing. He just needed 80 million ringgit to start this factory, but nothing. He wasted his 3 or 4 years of his time preparing probably the best pharmaceutical business plan in the world. But there's nothing, no job created. And he lost his job, Azlan? Not just he doesn't create his job, he lost his job in concentrating on the business plan. So, yeah, on one hand, you want governments, want private companies, government want to encourage private innovation, but the system that they impose is so bureaucratic that it kills innovation, it kills business. So the government must think that they are not in the business of doing business. They have to give the right, the motivation for people who wants to do business, to do business. But government servants are not businessmen. They are just government servants, but don't kill businesses. Don't kill the economy. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sufian. So there seems to be an agreement. I think the panelists, again, I'm trying to provoke them, but I'm not being successful here. They all seem to agree that what's important is actually to get innovation for Malaysians to increase their household income and to create jobs. Okay, I think now we don't have much time, so I would like to open up the floor for anyone to... Oh yes, Linda, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I just to I can see you're getting a bit frustrated. We're not sort of responding in the way you want, and I have to put in a word for the universities here. If you come to Nottingham, we definitely want you to be innovative, right? But yeah, the difficulty, I think, in answering a question like, should we be further liberalising, I think is a difficulty that we're encountering throughout the day. That's that we have to, and I certainly as a politics person, we have to be looking at the politics of the issue. There's no theoretical reason why you shouldn't be further liberalising, why any of us shouldn't be further liberalising. But we have to keep asking ourselves, are we bringing the hearts and minds with us? Or are we just imposing a top-down project? Are we actually looking ahead as far as we can, as far as we humanly can, and foreseeing these winners and these losers that we were talking about, and putting into place the strategies and the things we need to look out for those losers and make sure they're not going to lose really so badly that they're going to affect the fabric of our society. So I think that's why we're struggling with the question a little bit, because it's a fundamentally political question and not purely an economic one.
Thank you so much. All right, now I will invite people to respond from the floor. And please, okay, Dr. Razin will speak first, and then Kun Kasin. Yes, okay, Dr. Razin, please. You can also introduce yourself.
Yes. It's too short for me, one.
No, that he addresses you.
Razin Saleh, I was on the first panel this morning. 2 points. The first one relates to Dato Charon's couple of points he made. Let me say, you wanted at least some people around to be provocative, so let me try. I must say, as an economist, an economic liberal, and an international trade expert, I thought that almost everything Dato Charon said was completely wrong. To begin with, he doesn't understand comparative advantage. I'd be happy to explain it to him afterwards. But let me pick up the points he made about learning from industrial policy in Korea and Taiwan. It's wrong for the following reasons. There's a large debate on the East Asian miracle and as to what made certain economies successful. A large body of research, including research that comes from the World Bank, from a big report over 20 years ago, argues that they're mainly successful because they got the basics right, rather than indulging in social engineering through industrial policy. Prudent macroeconomic policy, domestic competition, opening to the world economy, export-oriented industrialization, infrastructure, education, and all that. A lot of intervention along the way, but they happen to open markets more and expand economic freedom more than other developing countries. As for industrial policy, the evidence is very mixed, and there's a lot of different interpretation. And the kind of interpretation that one gets, mainly from non-economists, about the success of this kind of mastermind industrial policy in Korea and Japan is highly dubious. And let's not forget, Dr. Mahathir tried it here. It's not that Malaysia should try it in the future. It was tried and it failed abysmally. What he did was he tried to copy the heavy and chemical industry program in Korea, which started the chaebols in the 1970s. That was the HICOM program here in the early 80s. So you had industrialization with a lot of cronyism and huge overinvestment. It led to a crisis, and he was pragmatic enough to learn from his mistake and liberalize the economy, and Malaysia industrialized through export-oriented industrialization after that. That's the takeaway I learn from the story of learning perhaps the wrong lessons from industrial policy in Northeast Asia. The second point I want to make is about inequality. And I want to contest the points made by a couple of the panelists on inequality here. The fact is that it's policies that have liberalized markets and expanded economic freedom that have led to the biggest rates of growth and unprecedented rates of poverty reduction that the world has ever seen, in the last 30 years in particular. Now, how does that relate to inequality? First point, it has actually reduced global inequality. While inequality might have gone up in some countries but not in others, inequality measured in terms of income, not other indicators, it has actually gone down when you compare it among people and households around the world. Why? Because so many people, especially in China and then India, have been dragged out of poverty. Secondly, the huge increase in resources, including tax revenue, that has come as a result of this growth, has allowed governments to spend much more on education. And one of the biggest inequality reducers in the world is the education of girls, not least in countries like India. Thirdly, inequality is actually entrenched and exacerbated because of illiberal policies. What do illiberal policies do? They make things very nice and cozy for insiders. You have your Malaysian version of that here, while keeping outsiders out, including small and medium-sized enterprises. If you have more liberal policies, you have more innovation, you open things up, others can come in and compete away rents. Very last point about the liberal position on inequality, the economic liberal position is this. You need equality in terms of the rules of the game. But liberalism is not about engineering equality of outcomes. That is social engineering. Yes, a safety net is a good thing, and there are gaps in many of the countries in the region and around, which should not be the same thing as creating a Western-style welfare state. But the main thing is to have those rules of the game for people to play the game, and the outcomes are then determined through competition. And Adam Smith's invisible hand works, more or less. When you start talking about inequality and talking about government intervening in all sorts of ways, then that opens the door to all kinds of illiberal interventions that not only reduce growth, but reduce freedom with it. That would be my broad take on the issue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Razin. Let's have also Kun Kasit, a former Foreign Minister of Thailand.
I still like the idea of looking at South Korea and Taiwan as the example. I think South Korea started with shipbuilding, then auto industries and electronics, biotech. At the moment, they are also exporting entertainment industries and the quality of life. I think Taiwan started with the agro industries, shrimp farms and so on, now into the electric biotechnology. Then in Europe, I think two countries, Israel, agro industry, but I think a lot of investment in the research and development, and they have now so many IT companies, and they are only second to the United States in terms of patent registration and so on. And there's more, startup companies and so on are being bought up now by multinational companies all over the world. The Netherlands, I think, have opted maybe 3 or 4 sectors. First, agro industry, food industry, high quality. Services, of course, they have the airport and the ports and so on. But third one is to export water management as a technology. And fourth, I think they're moving more into the biotech, electricity and so on. Then my question to all my Malaysian friends here and also professors from the University of Nottingham. You are number one in the rubber industry, and you are natural rubbers, latex and sheets and so on. You turn them into industrial products, 100%. You now have to import from Thailand, Indonesia for the raw materials. Having said this, then what would be the niche industries of Malaysia? And what are the lessons that you can learn from Taiwan, Israel, Netherlands, South Korea, and so on? The cooperation between the government and the private sector on the innovation and to have the niche industries. And without, I think, as different to South Korea, Taiwan, and Israel, that you did not have massive development assistance and free money from the United States. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's have a round of questions, and then I will actually take no more after this. So, no, I mean, this is the last round. So, Shaza, I think, wants to ask something. Anyone at the back?
Hi, I'm Shaza from Ideas. My question to you, to the panelists here, is that since you say innovation is a key driver for perhaps median income growth, is whether or not our current system allows for innovation to thrive. And in my personal opinion, if I can give the analogy of Mars and AirAsia, it does not, because we see preferential treatment for Mars. It's been saved over and over again to the point of Khazanah is basically taking care of it. And where AirAsia is impeded and stopped from thriving, whereas it actually has the competitive advantage. So I want to ask, how do we move forward to go beyond this kind of system that stops innovators who are innovating at a very local and global level? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Over there.
I think we live in a very funny country. I think we have economic liberalism to the extent that even the Malaysians who's out, I think a lot of people know, you go to Chowket, you go to Bukit Bintang, you go to Jalan Alo, I think they're not even local Chinese anymore, So this is something that is very Malaysian, We've got 6.7 million whatever foreign workers here. Do we not? God knows, right? So I think economic liberalism isn't the issue. The issue, because we are, arguably I could say we are pretty close to a kleptocracy if we're not already. So the problem is,
do you want to define kleptocracy?
Kleptocracy is when the government steals.
Okay, thank you.
So
the government steals. Kleptomania. Yeah.
It's a kleptocracy, a democracy where people are stealing, and there's government and various agencies. But that also allows for liberalism, but it hurts the local Malaysians. So, you've got these sort of externalities within our economic liberalism, which I think is hurting the country more than anything else. And if we do not resolve these issues. The other one is, of course, education, which I think people have brought up also. You don't have meritocracy in your education system. So no matter that you have 25,000 or 50,000 doctors, if only 5 or 10,000 of them have got any economic value, I mean, in the sense that people will go to them to pay to see them, it's pretty useless. So at the same time, when we have economic liberalism, we have a free market, yes, but then we also have rules. We have property rights, we have rules, and that is all over the place in Malaysia. In Kelantan, you're not Kelantanese, you can't own land. Land issues are everywhere in Malaysia. And then you want to open a bar in Bangsa, forget about the liquor license, because somebody will advise you, there's other ways to do it, just go ahead and do it. I mean, it's free market, but it's not following the rule of law. Because if you follow the rule of law, you're dead.
Okay.
I mean, Malaysians are like that. Look at Tony Fernandez, right? Yeah, $1, boom, let's go. That's the Malaysian way, very entrepreneurial. We're actually quite good at that. But people come to Malaysia to take advantage of us. Non-Malaysians. They thrive in our economy. Maybe there are things we are not prepared to do, they are prepared to do. And this is where we suffer.
Do you have a question for the panel?
I'd like them to respond to those criticisms of our economy.
All right, thank you. Actually, it's interesting. There's so many foreigners on Petaling Street. I was wondering why certain people were rallying in that street a few days ago. There are no more Chinese there, Anyone else? Okay.
Hello, my name is Amin. I'm a former staff at Ideas. Now I'm venturing into my own think tank. This is a new think tank. LEAD, Institute for Leadership and Development Studies, LEAD. My question is on inequality, because I believe many of the speakers also have touched a bit about the issues. My question to all speakers, do you think that our government intervention policies, especially related to DEB, is actually strengthen the inequality or otherwise? Because I believe the government have a good intention, to brought up all the so-called Bumiputras, but the policies actually hampered the Bumiputras.
Okay, thank you very much. If there's no more questions, I'm going to ask the panel to respond to whichever they would like to. Maybe starting from Azlan?
I think the first thing that we have to do is to identify our nation-building goals. Because whether we liberalize or we don't liberalize, to me there's a question of tactics or strategies and whatnot. If someone say that no, that's basic values, then I disagree. Because there's issue about liberties and whatnot. Those are maybe values, but not liberalization, right? It's very hypocritical to say that liberalization is the way to go or a value by itself. It's a virtue. No, it's not. Most Western countries, they were not liberalized in their trade policies. They were very protectionist. Be it America, Britain, Great Britain, they are all protectionist. And that's why Ha-Joon Chang wrote the book on kicking the ladder. Right? Once they get up there, they kick the ladder. And now they talk about the virtues of liberalizing your trade and so on and so forth. So I think it's the main thing is to identify what are the things that we want to pursue, what should be our political economy. Right? And I think that includes the issues on the Bumiputra policies and DEB and whatnot. There must be consensus, of course, or they may have been some kind of a social contract. But whatever it is, it's got to be reinforced, got to be reaffirmed, right? We must identify it. If it is what I've said, if it's something that we can do without, right? By all means, I think that should be a consensus. What should be the nation-building goals? But if it is not sustainable, if you do not address it, because I think when you talk about inequality, we have many dimensions. You have the rural-urban, you have the race dimension, you have the intra-race dimension, you have the Semenanjung, Sabah, Sarawak dimension. Some of these are critical and it's got to be addressed. We have to decide and of course we do not expect a referendum or things like that, but there must be intelligent leadership that address this matter very rationally. Very rationally. It should not be politicized. And then we decide. And once we agree on the key social goals, national goals, how to build our nation, I think then we can draw out the strategies. We can draw out. Then you can decide. And I think the other thing that's important is, and this has got to do with conflicting goals and aspirations, we must have an effective government. And in this respect, I worry about the prospects of the oppositions. You know, if they tend to sweep a lot of issues, controversial issues, under the carpet, get to the government first, and you will realize that once they're in government, they cannot rule. There will not be an effective government because a lot of issues will become controversial and contentious. What's important, I think, as a society, if we really believe that we are one Malaysia and we are together, right? We have common goals. We have the aspiration to build a good Malaysia for everybody, a shared prosperity. I think we must come to that. We must achieve that consensus.
Azlan, do you want to respond to any specific comments that were made on the floor, especially Dr. Razin or the question from the back?
I think I have concerns about Dr. Ravin's views on the. I think these are okay. I don't think it's the proper time to argue, to debate on this matter. But I think what you brought has always been the old narratives. And that's what has got us, the whole world, into a lot of problems. This is the thing. And because there's a lot of doublespeak and maybe even hypocrisy and fraud in how things are presented. Things like liberalization, for instance, right? What they mean is to open up. I mean, you open up. You see, they talk about free flow of capital. In the TPPA, one of the main conditions is free flow of capital. They talk about regulatory coherence. They talk about policy freeze. See, once you sign up the TPPA, I bet you can't do much policy anymore. There will be a very restricted, limited policy space. Right? Why? Because anything that you will do will be subject to legal suits. And not here in Malaysia, in the ICS courts in New York. So when you talk, these are the problems, and I didn't have time to cover that issue just now. We have, in the 21st century, we have a lot of problems. Poverty, hunger, inequalities, we have climate change. Does market liberalism could be a cure to this? Or was it market liberalism the curse of what the global problems facing? And similarly in Malaysia, right? Could it be a cure? I think but the most important thing is to establish our common goals. That is important.
Right, thank you. I'll give you 30 seconds to give your last closing remark as well, and I'll do the same all the way through here.
I think that's what I said earlier. We must come to, there must be more discourses. There must be more discourses. I think we must not be shy to discuss even sensitive issues like Muiputra issues. Policies. We must not, because these are, what you see, sometimes people cannot express it. They cannot articulate their rationale, why they want to pursue policies and whatnot, but they're very compassionate. But it's a life and death situation, you know. So we might think, oh no, that's not very, it's not very moral, you know, to bring up this affirmative action. It's not very moral. It's very immoral. But these are people's survival. So we must address, we must have more discourses, pursue consensus, and then from there we can go.
Okay, thank you very much, Dato Charon. There were also some things that I think Kun Kasit addressed, and also the question on MAS and AirAsia. Tony Fernandez was mentioned a few times, so please.
Okay, yeah, Kun Kasit's comment on rubber and what are the natural industries, AirAsia being the be-all and end-all, where the Bumi policy is actually bad for Bumis, and it's a very misguided view of economic history.
Next panel will be just the two of you.
But But no, it is true. Global inequality has gone down, and the biggest source of that is the incredible economic transformation in China, which brought thousands of people out of millions of people out of poverty. China, by the way, does not practice any economic liberalization. It is a communist state, command economy. But anyway, having gotten China out of the way, getting to this question on what Malaysia should be good at on rubber. You're right, sir. Rubber gloves is a major export from Malaysia. The rubber industry, rubber planting has come down a lot. We don't produce as much latex as we did, and we import most of it from Thailand and Indonesia, as well as nitrite. A lot of the now made synthetic. So those actually are not even imported from here. They're imported from the West. It's also very energy intensive, and so Malaysian cheap gas has a lot to do with it. I'm not sure that rubber is necessarily the future industry for Malaysia, but one thing it has to be, given the world is going today, it would be something in the more technology driven, but it could again be that. In terms of government scope of government, yes, I'm agnostic. Markets sometimes work, markets sometimes don't work. Government sometimes work, government sometimes doesn't work. But I don't think we should, be wedded to an idea that one or the other is better. It's all in the results. Tony Fernandez is an amazing person. He's very charismatic. They have now that is one example of innovation. It's not innovation in terms of engines or planes, but it's innovation in terms of the whole business in terms of the structure of the business and the way it's been done. I mean, you could argue that AirAsia is probably one of the first, the most successful online company Malaysia has, because it started off by selling tickets on the internet. So there are many ways to view AirAsia. But Mr. Tan Sri Tony is very good at speaking his mind and putting his point of view across. So, but please, just because he says it so, doesn't necessarily mean it's so. So. As in all things, there probably are two sides to the question. On the question on whether can policies backfire, yes, they can. Policies always have there are many unintended consequences, and I think we all probably have some personal examples of these unintended consequences. But was it a bad idea to have such a policy to begin with? I mean, if you look at the NEP, which came out in the early 70s, it was supposed to help the poorest sections of society. That's a very laudable aim. And in fact, if you look at the way in which poverty has decreased since 1970, it's fantastic. In 1970, half the population were in poverty. I mean, most of you here were probably born in 1990, right? Most of you born in the 90s? Yeah. I'd say half the people in this room were born in the 90s. 1970 to you is beyond ancient history. I vaguely remember the 70s, vaguely. And I was very young then. Half the population was in poverty. If you look at the Rancangan Malaysia, I can't remember, ketiga or kelima, the one which came out in 1970, there were, in terms of
Second Malaysian plan.
Second Malaysian plan, yeah, Second Malaysian plan. They have a statistic there, a number of Bumiputra accountants. There were 4 in the whole country. Number of Bumiputra architects, there were like 7. Okay, I mean, that's just a random example, right? But the thing is, there's been a huge change in Malaysian society, in the Malaysian economy from 1970 to today. So, at the very basic level, the policies work, We don't have half the people in poverty. Bumiputra incomes, if you want to measure that as a measure of inequality, Bumiputra incomes are higher, much higher now relative to the incomes of other ethnic groups than they were in the 70s. Yes, there is an ethnic gap, a gap between different ethnic groups, but that gap has shrunk tremendously. Yes, these things have succeeded. But of course, there are wrong things. We can always do better, and we must do better as a country. We must. We have no choice. We have to do better. But we can't just trash the whole of history and say, well, we've gotten anywhere. We have, but we have to do better. On the kleptocracy point from Gemma, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think it's I hope it's not as bad as you portrayed it just now. I think there are crooks around, but I don't think everybody's a crook. We're not in a situation where, I don't know, pick a random failed state, Somalia. We're not in that kind of failed state situation, but we have to be vigilant at all times and do better. Done well, but can do better. Be great.
Thank you.
Can-
And
should get
those
an A.
your closing remarks?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So Tony Fernandez might be sneezing away outside, but Linda, I will pass the time to you, and then finally to Dr. Sufyan.
Okay. Yes, sort of picking and choosing around. Yes, absolutely true. Global inequality has reduced. That's true, but of course the figure is quite high. So it's reduced from high. And what people see is, of course, the inequality in their own country. And as I showed in the slides earlier, I mean, this is discourse that even now the IMF and the World Bank is using. So I don't think it's that we're moving, very far to the left here. It's just trying to counteract something that's obviously not been addressed enough in the past. Social safety nets, yes. Generally, people maintain that the more buy-in you can get to social safety nets, i.e. the more general they can be, then the better they will be supported over time. Obviously targeting only certain groups is difficult. And on Tony Fernandez, I will only quote from an interviewee I had a few years ago who said he's done more to publicise ASEAN than possibly all the other publicity campaigns put together. So I think he should definitely be commended for that. And on my final kind of closing note, I guess I would appeal for a concentration on it throughout the whole day, really, but certainly in the economic panel as well. Let us focus on how we get there from here. We all know the there we want to get to, and we probably, many of us, share the liberal path along which we want to get there. But the trick is in the nitty-gritty of how we get there from here, and that's the hard work bit. That's the bit where pragmatism comes into play, where bringing people together comes into play, as you've done exactly today. Because often what we're criticising are stereotypes of each other rather than the actual, the real meaning of liberalism. Let's go for more of these exercises and let's look at how we make sure that we bring everybody into this discussion and make sure we have the greatest number of stakeholders involved as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Linda, and then finally, Dr. Sufyan.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate Mas for keeping my English points alive. So I think there's nothing wrong about saving MAS. Swiss Air was bankrupt one day, and the next day you have Swiss Air. So I think they are not in like circumstances in the trade language. So it's totally different. You go on the airlines, but they are totally different market segment. So you still need MAS and Air Asia for different type of market segments. But thanks for saving my English point. On the DEB, new economic policy, I think the biggest, this is probably the biggest success in transforming the society. But then, people have to graduate. They have to learn to graduate. There are people who are being driven, not driving, being driven in big cars like Porsche, Bentley, and still harping on scholarship for the children, still harping on getting the kids into government boarding schools, when they can afford to buy $3,000, $4,000 a tire for the Porsche or Bentley. So they need to graduate. This is the big problem with NEP. It's not the NEP, it's the graduation from the NEP. If I take one place for my daughter in the government boarding school, I deprive the people from the rural area who's supposed to be there, when I can well afford to pay my daughter's school. So this is the problem with the beneficiaries of the beneficiaries of the new economic policy. They must learn to graduate. People who go and compete in the government procurement, there's nothing wrong about competing, but if you are driving a Porsche Cayenne. A lot of contractors drive in Porsche Cayenne. Yet they still compete to be the Longkang, the Class F. You are killing the people who drive the old Toyota. So they have to learn to graduate. So I think keeping an EP is probably an option, because there are still people out there in the rural area who still live in the 70s. But people who have graduated to 2015, who have gone to Europe for studies, coming back from America, they must learn to graduate. They must learn to live beyond NEP. This is something that we have to get into the brain of the people. There's nothing wrong about the policy, but how do we tell the people who are already rich enough to do away with this? Get out. You're not part of this anymore. So there's something there's a huge complaint, because people are not happy. People are not happy, and when people are not happy, they blame the government. And when it's not the government's fault. On other issues like regulatory coherence, I think we have to understand that regulatory coherence is about how do we go about making regulations. I have had a very educational experience working in Myanmar, where we implement regulatory coherence in Myanmar. Myanmar used to be a military run, but now if you need to make one particular law, you have to go through the process of socializing the draft. You have to call in the NGOs, the civil society, explain the draft law, and then you go to parliament, you meet with the committees in parliament, not just bulldoze things through overnight, 2 hours chance to debate a bill, no. So in Myanmar, we have learned a lot about regulatory coherence. And I think Malaysia can learn a lot from Myanmar on how to do regulatory coherence. It's not about the Western way of doing things, but this is about democratizing the way the government do laws and regulations. Finally, I have one last statement which I would like to make is, when we talk about liberalization, we are not just talking about foreign coming to Malaysia or foreign against Malaysian, but we are talking about how do we encourage liberalization, Malaysians and Malaysians, and not just foreign and Malaysian. So then we can actually encourage the development of the economy. Okay, I have one advertisement since I have the last point. We are going to have a forum on the investor-state dispute settlement at 2:30 on Tuesday, the 22nd of September, in the Senate room in the University Kebangsaan, the National University. So you're most welcome to come. We have a broad cross-section of society, people who are opposed, against, no opinion, no nothing. It's good to be there because MITI will be there. A lot of people will be there. Parliamentarians will be there. Then we can have a big discussion about the ISDS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sufian. I'd like to also pitch for something that we will plan to do in the next few months. Ideas will have another forum or debate on mega trade agreements sometime in November. So there's a lot of talk about TPPA, but we're also going to talk about other trade agreements, not just the TPPA in the Malaysian context. Well, please join me in thanking the panel, all four of my speakers today. I think they've done an excellent job in trying to unpack this very difficult topic of economic liberalism. You've all stayed throughout the day. Thank you very much for staying as well. And I will pass now the time back to the MC, Fariza.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost at the end of our conference today. Just to deliver the concluding remarks for the conference, can I please invite Wan Saiful Wanjan?
Right, thank you very much, Tricia, and all the panelists. I'm going to be very quick to say thank you very much to everyone for coming. But just a few closing remarks so that we don't leave with hanging situation. I think clearly there are many different views many different opinion when it comes to liberalism. And one of the most interesting comment made earlier this morning is about how there's a difference between liberalism and anarchy. And there have been many times when people in Malaysia talk about liberalism, they are actually referring to anarchy. So that's a point that I think we should be thinking about. But I guess the crux of the issue when it comes to liberalism is about the role of people with authority, role of people with power, role of the government, so to speak, whether or not they should be allowed to control and dictate on so many different things that we do in our daily life. And usually a liberal would say the government should be smaller, which means the government should have less power to coerce you into doing things that you do not want to do, and the individual should be supreme in the sense that we can decide what we want to do, what we want to buy, where we want to go, what we want to talk about, and so on. But the conversation immediately, if you look at the flow of the sessions that we had today, the conversation immediately becomes a little bit complicated when we bring in the topic of religion and race. And this is something that has been clouding the Malaysian debate for such a long time. Whereas when we talk about the economy, when we talk about situation in the region generally, the conversation is not that complex. But when we bring in issues around race and religion, immediately there's another element, another layer of conversation that we need to deal with. It is also interesting, even though there are differences in opinion, I think observing the session from here just now, but not just this session, but all the sessions today, it is also interesting that I think other than the one on the economy, every other session, all the sessions and almost all the speakers immediately went into the issue of religion. And as much as they can, they would try to quote something from the Quran. So now I'm going to do it. No, I'm not doing it. No. I was sitting here just now when Dr. Wong Chin Huat was finalizing his presentation, and he was asking me this verse of the Quran. Well, which surah is it? I thought, hang on, how am I supposed to know? And he was asking me about the one from Al-Ma'idah that he quoted just now. But in any case, so that is an interesting observation. The fact that religion comes into the picture. But even when we're talking about other religion, it is always commentary on Islam that matters in the conversation, especially when it comes to the topic of liberalism. But I guess, if you want to generalize, it's not just about liberalism, it's about anything else as well in Malaysia today, even, whether or not you should be, but the thing that really, but I was in Italy for the week and I saw a video of the 16th of September rally, and there was a lady who was saying things like, we cannot trust the DAP, we cannot trust the Chinese, we have given them everything, now they are coming back to us. And she said something about pendatang is pendatang, people who are visiting the country, they are visitors to the country. Basically just saying the Chinese are pendatang lah. And then she went on to say, babi tetap babi. And the thing that really amazed me, babi tak babi means pigs are pigs. Just in case you're not sure, she was emphasizing that. But the thing that really amazed me from that was people continued with takbir. And I was really amazed. Since when do we say takbir when you mention babi? And frankly, the first occurrence of this that I saw was actually in a speech by the current president of PAS, Hadi Awang, in Congress Rakyat, when he was giving the analogy of anjing menyalak bukit. Sorry, I'm using a mixture of languages here. Anjing menyalak bukit bukan sebab dia nak menyalak bukit, tapi sebab ada babi di bukit. And again, ada takbir selepas tu. So mungkin, I will put a comment on my Facebook status. Itu alhamdulillah satu syiar baru dalam ajaran Islam, takbir selepas babi. Janganlah bawa itu, I'm still lepas member, Istiqamah sehingga kemenangan. So moving on from that, even though we may have differences when we talk about the word liberal and liberalism and the concept of liberalism, I think the take-home point for me, at least, from this whole session, it is really amazing that we may have differences in ideas, differences in views, differences in how to get to the end point, but the end point is still about how to improve the country overall. And this is so something that I've been toying about for the last 5 years. That ideas has existed. We're becoming 6 years old in February next year. Over the years, the way I've seen how civil society work in Malaysia is when we're different from someone, we refuse to talk with them. So if they're on the other side, if they're on the Perkasa side, on the ISMA side, the immediate reaction is, no, what's the point of talking to them? It's sesat lagi menyesatkan. And they say the same about the liberals. But the end point is still about how to improve the country. I think somehow there might be differences, but we need to bridge these differences, especially in the light of the current, using Jema's word, not my word, kleptocratic environment. So the police want to arrest him. I was just quoting him. So in the current situation, there might be differences in opinion, differences in the method to get to the end point, but it's really interesting to observe that despite the differences, the end point is still the same. We still want to see a better way, a better Malaysia, so to speak. So this is where I think we need to appreciate that when it comes to liberalism, the stakeholders, it's not just about people who believe in the concept. The stakeholders for liberal ideas are much wider than that. And if you are liberal, if we are liberal, I suppose we need to engage with everyone. And as a liberal, one of the key characteristics is we can agree to disagree. And I suppose I want to end by saying that the work will continue, of course. You can see on the screen here, there are a series of events that we are doing. Tomorrow there's something else happening as well. Amin is organizing it. I think the leaflets were distributed, right? Di mana Shah Village in PJ, another conference, another meeting on freedom and liberty in Malaysia. And we are organizing a series of masterclasses on liberalism as well. We have something on liberalism and economic development, liberalism, classical liberalism generally first, and then liberalism and education, I think, right? Yes, and liberalism in economic development. So, sorry, let's go back. Let me tell the dates. Introduction to classical liberalism is on the 17th of October. It's more or less one day, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The next session is on the 31st of October, same time. The next session is on the 14th of November. The venue is at a place, and this is an interesting one, it's a place called Ideas Academy in Pudu, Fraser Business Park near Chan Sao Lin LRT station. Ideas Academy is actually a secondary, to make it easy, it's basically a secondary school that we run for stateless and refugee children. So if you're thinking that, if one of the impression that you get is the liberals and the capitalists and the free market people do not care about the poor, we have a school for the poor where we are using an international syllabus, catering for, we can cater up to about 300 students. We're providing that for free when the other schools are probably charging in the region of 18,000 to maybe 50,000 if you go to other places. So we are providing that for free for refugees, stateless and refugee children. And it's an evidence that we don't just talk about addressing inequality. Some people just go banging on and on about how to address inequality, but all they do is talk. But we try to do something, and that's the reality of. I'm pitching in for liberalism for one more time here. and I suppose if you look at the philanthropists and so on around the world, many of them come from a freer market economy environment. So with that, I want to say thank you very much to the team who organized the event. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to thank speakers as well. Thank you very much.